Hi everybody, and welcome to my video introducing the Welta Welti I. This is a folding viewfinder camera with shutter speeds of 1 second to 1/250th of a second, and depending on the shutter you have, all post-war models have the Weber shutter, such as this one, and some of the pre-war models had Comper shutters, which went up to 1/500th of a second. The post-war economy in Germany, where this guy was made after World War II, was not as strong as the pre-World War II economy, so some of the cameras that came out of there didn't have as many bells and whistles as the pre-war models did. This is just one case. It comes equipped with a 50mm 1 to 2.9 Meyer lens. This one does anyway. Other Welti ones had Zeiss, Steinhall, and Schneider lenses for pre-war. Post-war models had Zeiss lights or Meyer lenses like this one has. This has a PC port for flash syncs, and it works at any sync. And you can even use a modern flash on this camera. You can just go pick one up at your favorite camera or electronics store and use a flash from it. So the target market for the Welti I, believe it or not, was the high-end camera user. It was sold in the US in 1938 for $75, which in 2014 dollars is approximately $1,236. So think about that. For the amount of money in 2014 dollars for this camera, you could pick up a professional grade DSLR. That's a high-end camera. Exceedingly good manufacturing and top-notch optics led this camera to be a very, very good selection for people looking for a very good viewfinder. It has a bunch of bells and whistles on it that most viewfinders don't. The body's made from die-cast aluminum, so even though it's a hefty, weighty camera, it's actually really light for its size, and it's really light compared to other viewfinders. After World War II, the prices dropped on these cameras up to 80%, however. So it's of note that the price I quoted you is the pre-World War II price. I couldn't really find hard numbers for the post-World War II price. And if you want to find out when your camera was made, you can't find out the exact year or month, but you can get a general idea. What you want to do is check out the back of the camera. So you can see there, mine says Germany, USSR, occupied. Cameras made during World War II say Germany, USSR, occupied. They might also say made in Germany. Some of the wartime era ones would either say one or two of those. However, if it says USSR occupied, it was definitely manufactured during World War II. The Welti I was produced by Welta in various incarnations and with some production differences from 1935 until the mid-1960s. It was produced in Germany and East Germany at different times throughout the course of its production. I couldn't find anything saying what this was directly preceded by, maybe nothing. It was made at the same time, however, as the Welti II, the Welti III, the Outtakes, and the Watson being the most stripped down model. And as for what it was followed by, maybe nothing as well. This might just be an entity unto itself. It was very hard to find conclusive information about this camera in some regards, and largely that's because of the damage wrought to Germany during World War II, and a lot of the records from some of the camera manufacturers and other companies were lost during the war. Well, if you have your Welta Welti, let's take a look at some of the features. So we're going to start with the top of the camera, and the camera doesn't have any camera strap lugs. It would have come with a leather case that you could hang around your neck, or as I do, I just tend to put it in a pocket. It's small enough to fit in a cargo pant pocket, not really anything else. It's not a small folding camera. But here we have the film rewind knob. So when you're done with your roll of film, you rewind it here. This is your viewfinder. You look through the back and through the front, and you'll see that there's N and infinity. If you are greater than, I want to say it's 8 feet, you want to have this little knob set to infinity. Closer than, I think it's 8 feet, and I'll double check on that, and we'll it's in later in the script. But closer than that, you have it set to N, and that corrects your parallax. This is your accessory shoe, so you could mount something like a range finder in here to get an exact distance to your subject. This is your frame counter, and it has to be manually reset when you are done with a roll of film. This is the shutter release, and it only works when there's a roll of film in, so we'll take a look at how that works a little bit later. This is the film transport release, and you use this when you're loading film. We'll see how that works again as well. There are a bunch of buttons on this that aren't standard to modern cameras, and it's got some interesting engineering that could possibly have been a little bit more efficient. This is the film transport knob, and it's what you use to advance your film after each frame. And the frame counter will automatically advance as you go, but it will not do so unless you have film in the camera. The frame counter and the shutter release reset are tied to the film advance sprocket. So this is the lens. This is the lens focusing knob. Now, as these have gotten old, the oil and the grease that was used to lubricate them has broken down either with heat or cold or time and dirt and lots of other factors. And so mine usually puts up a big fight when I try to focus it, especially at first. If it's been out in the sun a little bit, then it's a little bit easier to do. But it's not going to cooperate today. This is the shutter speed selection wheel, and so you rotate this wheel, and you can see that there's a little black dot, and that tells you what your selected shutter speed is going to be. This is the shutter cock, so all you have to do to arm your shutter is pull that back, and normally you just push the shutter release button on top, but because I don't have film in, I'm going to trip it manually right there. This is your aperture lever, and you can select from f2.9 up to f16 on this one. I saw some pontificating on one of the sources I read saying, oh, well, I think this is actually more than an f2.9. I think this is faster than that. I will tell you that the aperture opens up beyond f2.9 on this. It is not, as some people have said, an f2 lens. It's an f2.9, and the reason is because the front element is not big enough to be an f2 lens. It is an f2 lens. That front element would be 25, give or take, millimeters across, and the opening for the aperture would also be 25, which the aperture on this, I believe, can extend to f2, but that's beyond the lens's capability. So if you have the Meyer, it is actually an f2.9 lens, even if you put the dial here wider open than f2.9. That is effective. That's as fast as it gets. That's not doing anything more. At any rate, here's your flash PC socket, and here's how you open and close the camera. To close it, since it's closed already, you just push down on these arms here and here. To open it, push this button, guide it open. You do not want to let the springs cause it to shoot out. You do not want to do that. We also, on the front, have the door. This is the tripod rest, so that when your camera is open, you can rest it like that to take a portrait orientation picture. It's sort of like having a built-in tripod. You can set it down on a park bench or on a fence or something like that and have it take your picture with the self-timer, or just have it take a long duration nighttime photo because it'll be resting and stable. One other thing on the front, let's see if I can get some good light on it. Here we go. It says Wleti I here, and somebody who knows significantly more about these cameras than I could figure out roughly when the camera was made by the format of the Wleti I logo, as well as additional information on the front of the camera. at various times in the production life of this camera, it was written at an angle in different scripts in a different shape. Instead of a box, it would have been written in an oval and things like that. So there were variances that could help indicate more specifically the age of the camera than just the text, which is stamped on the back. On the side here, we have the release for the film back. But before we get there, on the back itself, we have the number 1 Welti. We have a table which shows the range and of sharpness with different apertures and focal points. So what you can do is you can say my lens is set to focus at 5 feet and I'm at f11. So we go over here to f11, which is right there. 5 feet, which is down near the bottom, and everything from 3 feet 10 inches to 7 feet 2 inches will be in focus. So the more you stop down your lens, getting over to f16, and this goes up to f22, even though f22 isn't marked on the lens. The more you stop down, the more that is in focus, and the further your focus is, the further the distance for your focus will be. And here down on the bottom is your Made in Germany stamp. So I'm going to take on the bottom, there's very little on the bottom. What we have is the tripod bushing off to the side, a weird location. This is the release I just showed you to open up the camera. And then both of these feet are the same, so that it can sort of kind of rest like that. Not really, oh dear. So it can sort of kind of rest on the feet, not really, it's not balanced for that. But it gives you something that if you're setting it down to take a long duration picture, it gives you a convenient resting point. Okay, so inside the camera, over here we have the film cassette chamber, and the film knob pops out so film can be loaded, and then stamped inside the cassette chamber is your serial number. And I don't know too much about how the serial numbering system works on these, whether it's sequential or if there's some significance to the year, to the numbers that would indicate the year. I have no insight. If you happen to know, that would be fantastic to share that. Then here, this raised area and this raised area are part of the film guide rail system, and they keep the film from moving up and down as it passes through the camera. These silver rails are the film guide rails that help keep it flat on plane. Here's the back of the lens in the camera obscura, which pops out in the accordion. This is the film tension sprocket and frame counter linkage. And as you can see, after you take a picture, it rolls freely until you've advanced your film, and then it stops. This is the film take-up spool. And then over here, very advanced features for this camera's age. We have a film guide spring, the film pressure plate, which is extremely, extremely well worn in this camera. It has seen a lot of film pass through it. And then here we have a film cassette spring, which helps keep the cassette lined up to allow the film to move properly into the camera's back. So let's load some film here. The first thing you do once you open the back is pop the film rewind knob up, and then you can just drop your film in, and then you put the film rewind knob back. Okay. So once you have your film loaded, you're going to pull out a leader. Pull out a leader, there we go. You're going to feed it into the film take-up spool. Just like that. And then you hit this little button on top. And now you can advance the film take-up spool. And you do it once more, just to make sure you have a really nice, good grip on there. Close this. Push, advance, push, advance, push, advance. 3 might be overkill on this camera because it's pretty tiny, but I would rather do overkill than have a half-shot frame. So then you advance this manually, and you always want to count up to 1. If you're thinking ahead of time, you can actually advance it to 36 beforehand, and it will, when you go from 36 to 1, that's when you know you're ready to go. So the process for taking a picture is you open up the front of the camera and you figure out what shutter speed you're going to use. So I'm going to say it's going to be 1/100th. And then you can set your aperture to whatever you want it to be. The aperture can be changed at any time. The shutter speed can be changed up until you cock the shutter. Once you cock the shutter, don't change the shutter speed. Now you know what you want to take a picture of, you're ready to go. Hit the shutter release. And you can see that the shutter button, as I did that, the shutter uncocked itself. After you hit the shutter release, then you push this button and you can advance the film. And you can see that the other knob is turning, indicating that it's being taken up. So we're going to show you an abbreviated process of this. Now anytime you have film in a camera, you can't open the back because you'll ruin the film. But this film's already ruined, so I'm going to show you what happens when you take a picture. Let's pretend the front of the camera is open and you cock the shutter, you take the picture, and then you hit the release, and then you advance the film. And you can see as the sprockets come through this, it turns some gears up at the top, which operate the clockwork mechanism inside of it. So after you take your 24 or 36 frames, what you do is you get to the end of your roll. To rewind the film, you lift the knob up here, and then you can rewind it freely. And you'd rewind the entire thing. I reuse the film, so I don't. Then you could either put more film in or shut that, bring that down, and turn this with your thumb so that this locks in place, and that's set. Now, I mentioned in the Viewfinder that the Viewfinder has parallax correction. When you look through it, which is actually kind of a silly thing to do, it's a tiny little Viewfinder. It's only going to give you a rough estimation of what you're going to see in your frame. If something is closer than I want to say than 12 feet, what you want to do is click the Viewfinder for parallax correction, and that will allow you to have the correct image in the Viewfinder, and works just like that. And then when you're done, when you go back to focusing beyond 12 feet, you just push it back into place, and that locks the lock in place. It's all spring operated. It's very, very clever and very well thought out and very robust engineering as well. Basically, because the Viewfinder is not aligned with the lens, it's not on the same plane as it in any sense, not X, Y, or Z planes, the light coming through the Viewfinder is going to be different than the light coming through the lens. And the angle that the light is traveling to get to the Viewfinder will be different. Now, if you're taking a picture of a mountain, it's no big deal. The angle is so insignificantly different that it's going to be what you see in the Viewfinder will be what you see on the film. But if somebody's 4 feet in front of your camera, then it makes a big difference. So here's how parallax works. Let's say that this represents your camera, okay? Here's the Viewfinder, and here's the lens. Now, if you've got a subject that you're taking a picture of that's way over here, the light coming from the subject, that's bouncing from the subject to the lens, is not going to be that much different than the light that's going to the Viewfinder. So at 15, 30, 1,000 feet, the angle between these the angle between these two triangles is not a big deal, and what's in the Viewfinder will be near as makes no difference or exactly the same as what is in the film plane, in the lens going to the film plane. But let's move that subject closer. Now you can see, if you're 8 feet or 4 feet or 2 feet, that what's going into the Viewfinder is different than what's going into the lens. So some special features and notes. The earliest Welti I bodies had painted top and bottom plates. You can see this one is silver. The very oldest ones had black painted top and bottom plates. Here's the silver top plate, and here's the silver bottom plate. So I can tell you right now, it's not one of the oldest Weltis. Also, it was made during World War II. Early Wleti I bodies had the viewfinder on the center, and later ones had them offset. So you can see this is offset. The centered viewfinder would be where the accessory shoe is on this camera. Some of the chromed Welti I bodies, however, may have had centered viewfinders. So the oldest had black top and bottom plates. The second oldest would have had chrome top and bottom plates with a centered viewfinder. The body shape and markings changed over time. The Welti I was a later moniker, and earlier bodies just said Welti. The knobs and dials were also different on them, as well as the shutters and lenses. So on this one, it has more of an angular taper at the corners, or at the ends rather. You can see right there it's sort of angular. The older ones from the 1930s were more rounded going into the corners. Also, one other difference I noted, I didn't find this in any of the research, but I noted it looking at different pictures of different Welti Is, is that some of the Welti Is had very large screws holding the accessory shoe in place. Some of them had very small, like this one has very small screws. So I don't know whether the small screws were older or later, but that's one of the cosmetic differences in them. As with any of these old cameras that were produced over the span of multiple decades, especially a decade as turbulent as the 40s, there were multiple design differences that didn't constitute calling it something different. They just made some modifications. Things were different back then, and people weren't as focused on getting the latest, greatest, newest, best thing that is better than everything else. They were just focused on having something that was good and did what they wanted. And marketing wasn't advanced nearly as advanced back then. So there was nobody telling people that they should have the latest, greatest, newest, best thing. And so manufacturers would just make a change to the Welti I, and it wasn't significant, it just looks slightly different, so let's just keep calling it the Welti I. It's not a change we need to make. So a couple of things not to do with your camera before we go on to sample photos. Avoid touching the lens elements, front and back, because you don't want to get fingerprints on them. Be careful with the accordion bellows that is inside of it, because the accordion bellows there is light proof, and if it gets a hole, then it will cause your images to have weird looking shapes and things like that, and artifacts in them, all of which are unappealing. Also, don't touch the shutter. I mean, in order to touch the leaf shutter, you'd have to take the lenses apart, but it's a good idea not to stick your finger in the leaf shutter. If you do, don't leave this in your car, because as you can see by how hard it is to adjust my focus knob, if the oils break down or get into the wrong place, it will definitely impair your camera's functionality. Likewise, don't let it get cold. Don't store it in plastic bags or boxes, because moisture will get in there and it will ruin the components on this. And don't let it get in the rain, because this is not a weather-sealed camera. It was very nice and very high-end by its day, but it's also 75, 80 years old, some of them. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm more than happy to answer those for you. If you have any comments or requests or suggestions for future videos, please let me know. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track. If you'd like to subscribe and find out when I have more videos coming, that would be great. And one last thing, before we go to photos taken with this exact camera that I have just told you about this family of cameras with, thank you guys for watching. For what it is, the Welti I is a fine camera. It's heavy and clunky, but compared to its contemporaries, the photos are very good. Sure, focusing is a pain, and in general, so is using it, but it's built solidly and remains a reliable performer. If you can estimate distances, then this is a fine camera. These old viewfinders were the entry-level cameras of their day, what we would have on our cell phones today. and they served a limited photographic purpose, snapshots with which to remember events, picnics, fairs, first days of school. These were the events that the Welti was made to capture, and in its day, it was a great option to perform those tasks. Pull out a leader, feed it into the film take-up spool. Come on, there we go. And nope, there we don't go. Take a picture, hit the release, advance the film. Oh, darn it. I have misaligned the film. Can I get it back?